I'm sure that Noam Chomsky's life and work are not foreign to any of us here today. And I believe that his future legacy, whether one shares his ideas or not, will attest to how far a true intellectual is willing to go to walk the talk, and or to adhere to the tenets of one's moral values in such a way as to exemplify the true independence of one's spirit of analysis and judgment. Chomsky chose what Said terms are the risks and uncertain results of the public sphere, against a cushy, very well-paid job at MIT as a linguist, which he had already acquired and which would have given him lifetime security status and wealth, when he decided to leave MIT in order to pursue intellectual independence as, in Said's words, an amateur speaking truth to power in broad realms that go beyond his narrow professional career, which ought to be the intellectual's contribution. Although one cannot blame academics whose research was applied directly by the American or any other government for that matter in covert activities, sabotage, or even outright war, one can perhaps ascertain that it is incumbent on academics to delineate clearly when someone encroaches on their intellectual space, the intellectual space of uncompromising freedom of opinion and expression, which is the secular intellectual's main bastion. To abandon its defense, Said says, or to tolerate tampering with it, is the secular, to abandon its defense or to tolerate tampering with it, with any of its foundations, is in effect, as Said says, to betray the intellectual's calling. Perhaps a good example of guarding that space jealously is to continually challenge society and government to define what a think tank is. What is a think tank? Is it not an organization which funnels government money to generate research that helps in creating foreign policy of a country? Does not a think tank in many instances cater to lobbyists who support certain governments, ideologies, strategies, and policies? Said's basic question for the intellectual is, how does one speak the truth? What truth, for whom, and where? If we agree with Said that one of the main intellectual activities of the 20th century has been the questioning, not to say the undermining of authority, if we concur that in that domain and within the influential schools of philosophers, Michel Foucault ranks very high, if we see any merit in Foucault's critique of objectivity and authority, and that he performed a positive service in highlighting to us how humans construct their truths in the secular world, we might then want to pose the following questions. Why have we moved to the other extreme? Are we adrift in self-indulgent subjectivity? Why is there a total disappearance of what seemed to have been objective moral norms and sensible authority? Why is it that at the beginning of the 21st century, the other scandalous development that has surfaced is that our institutions of higher education are moving completely away from being republics of scholars to stakeholder organizations? Let us perhaps hope with Said that we can be fastidious in considering the threats to the individual intellectual of a system that rewards intellectual conformity, as well as willing participation in goals that have been set out not by science, but by the government. We all know that research and accreditation are controlled in order to get and keep a larger share of the market. And we see that in Bahrain so much, in the Arab world, definitely. One of the shabbiest of all intellectual gambits, Said says, is to pontificate about abuse in someone else's society and to excuse exactly the same practices in one's own. Said gives the example of Alexis de Tocqueville on Algeria and John Stuart Mill on India. How often have we as educators and intellectuals found ourselves in such situations where the temptations to turn off one's moral sense or to think entirely from within the specialty or to curtail skepticism in favor of conformity? Said's answer is many intellectuals succumb completely to these temptations, and to some degree all of us do. No one is totally self-supporting, not even the greatest of free spirits. I hear Socrates, he's saying something weird. I know what he's saying. He's saying, why is a Palestinian Canadian academic pontificating in this forum about what American or other Western academics ought to be or not be doing, rather than discuss the horrors academics face in the Arab world on many levels? I will say that it's because we have been in our societies direct recipients of the full-blown consequences of American foreign policy, which has impacted our societies and educational systems greatly. We suffered under British and French, under the British and French colonialisms, and now we are suffering under the hegemony of American foreign policy. This is the truth of the matter. So I am, in a sense, and in the words of Bell Hooks, talking back. You can imagine how infuriating it is for disinherited Palestinians to see Israelis continue to occupy their homes in East Jerusalem on land that constitutes less than 3% of what they were promised originally in the negotiations. Where Palestine is concerned, and I'm giving this as an example, we gave the example of Iraq, I will give the example of Syria. The US supports Israel unequivocally, and Israel acts with impunity. The disillusionment Palestinian and other intellectuals feel in regard to American intellectuals, especially those who studied in the West, like myself, springs from the idealist dream that we wholeheartedly believe in the ability of Western universities to generate intellectuals who will not blindly support their country's crimes and who will not become, in Said's words, denatured by their fawning service to an extremely flawed power. Where are the intellectuals with an alternative and more principled stand that enables them, in effect, to speak truth to power? I personally believe many of them are in this room. I hear Socrates accusing me of going on a long tangent, so I have to revert to our original question. How can each one of us contribute to providing some solutions to the urgent problems I sketched out at the outset? I hear Socrates retort, are you saying that the onus is on the educators and intellectuals to provide all the solutions? Why should it be? Are they the ones who will find solutions to famine and hunger, drug trafficking, addiction, global warming, sexual slavery, and human trafficking? Their plate is already full. How will they do it? They are disempowered politically. The philosopher is not yet king, my dear, as my disillusioned student Plato would say. Now, I've actually summarized the dialectical engagement that went on between me and Socrates, just to save time. It was longer than that. Perhaps I am now ready to spell out my pedagogic creed in the true tradition of Dewey. Number one, I believe that educators are generally well-versed in the values that concern the whole human race. Educators are capable of generating a consensus on what is universally considered objective moral norms and sensible authority. Of course, by objective, I don't mean absolute or unchanging, but objectivity garnered through reason that is embodied. Mark Johnson critiqued the absolutist objectivist worldview in his book, The Moral Imagination, published in '93. Basically, the decisive line is drawn between the mental, conceptual, rational, cognitive, a priori, and theoretical on the one side, and the physical, perceptual, imaginative, emotional, a posteriori, and practical on the other side. Educators understand through their experiences in the classroom and outside of it what Johnson draws out theoretically about the static, non-developmental, and non-evolutionary absolutist view of our identity as moral